The Galactic Council Chamber had stood for over 300,000 years. Its walls were made of living crystal that pulsed with soft light. Its ceiling stretched so high that clouds formed near the top. And in all that time, across all those centuries, no species had ever spoken to the Council the way Ambassador David. Cole was about to speak. He stood alone on the petitioner's platform, a small circle of white stone designed to make visitors feel tiny and weak. Above him, rising in endless rows like a mountain of judgment, sat representatives from 412 alien species. Some had scales. Some had tentacles. Some were made of pure energy that flickered like flame. All of them looked down at the single human with expressions ranging from curiosity to contempt. David was 47 years old. His gray suit was simple and clean. His hands were steady at his sides. His face showed nothing, though inside his chest, his heart beat like a war-drummed-out High Chancellor Vorath, a creature of shifting silver liquid, spoke first. His voice filled the chamber like rolling thunder. Human representative, you have been brought before this council to answer for the crimes of your species. You have built weapons that are forbidden. You have expanded beyond the borders we assigned to you. You have refused to submit to inspection of your colonies. How do you respond to these charges? The chamber hummed with agreement. Many species had waited decades for this moment. Humanity had grown too fast. They asked too many questions. They were too aggressive, too curious, too dangerous. They needed to be stopped. David did not move. He did not bow. He simply looked up at the mountain of alien faces and said, "Before I respond, I need to ask this council a question." Vorath's liquid form rippled with anger. You do not ask questions here, human. You answer them. I understand, David said calmly. But my question is simple. Where are the children? The silence that followed was absolute. Even the energy beings stopped flickering. I do not understand your meaning, Vorath said. But something in his voice had changed. 11 months ago, a human transport ship called the Aurora was carrying colonists to our new settlement in the outer systems. Among those colonists were 361 children. The youngest was 4 years old. The oldest was 15. David paused, letting the numbers sink into the ancient stones. The Aurora disappeared without a trace. No emergency signal. No wreckage. Nothing. Space is dangerous, said an insect-like creature from the upper tiers. Ships are lost all the time. Yes, they are, David agreed. But the Aurora was traveling through territory controlled by the Kelvani Dominion, one of your most respected member species. He turned slowly, his eyes finding a section of the chamber where massive creatures with armored shells sat in rigid formation. The Kelvani monitor every particle that moves through their space. Nothing passes without their knowledge. The Kelvani delegation remained still, but David had spent 20 years learning to read alien body language. He saw the way their eye stalks had turned inward, the way their claws had tightened. We searched for 11 months, David continued. We sent messages to every species along the Aurora's route. We begged for information. We received nothing. Until 6 weeks ago. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small device. It was basic human technology, a simple hologram projector that the Council had not bothered to take from him. 6 weeks ago, a Kelvani cargo ship had an engine failure and drifted into unclaimed space. A human rescue team responded to their distress call. This is what they found in the cargo hold. The hologram flickered to life above David's palm dot. It showed a cage. The cage was small, built for creatures no bigger than human children. The bars were close together, preventing any real movement. And inside, barely visible in the dim light, were small figures. Human children. Boys and girls, their bodies thin and weak, their eyes empty of hope. They did not look up when the rescue team's lights found them. They had stopped expecting help long ago. 81 survivors, David said quietly. 81 children out of 361. The Kelvani shipping manifest listed them as specimens for biological research. The hologram changed. Now it showed a laboratory. Rows of glass containers lined the walls. Inside each container, floating in green liquid, was a human child. Medical machines surrounded them. Tubes ran into their small bodies. We found this facility on one of the Kelvani moons. 43 more children. Some of them will never walk again. Some of them have damage to their minds that cannot be healed. All of them carry scars that will last forever. David turned off the projector and put it back in his pocket. When he looked up at the council again, something in his eyes had changed. Something cold and hard now lived there. The charges against humanity are correct, he said, and his voice carried to every corner of the vast chamber. We have built forbidden weapons. We have expanded past our borders. We have prepared for war. He smiled, and it was not a friendly smile. But we did not come here as prisoners answering for crimes. We came here to deliver a message. High Chancellor Vorath's form had stopped moving entirely. What message? 3 weeks ago, the human fleet surrounded the Kelvani homeworld. We did not attack. We did not need to. We simply showed them what we had built, while the galaxy watched us and laughed at our primitive technology. David let that sink in for a moment. The Kelvani government has agreed to surrender every child they have taken. Not just human children. All children from every species they have harvested over the past 10,000 years. The data we recovered from their facilities shows that humanity is not the first victim. We are simply the first to survive long enough to fight back. The chamber exploded into chaos. Species began shouting accusations at each other. Old grudges surfaced. The Kelvani delegation tried to leave, but found the doors blocked by council security. David waited for the noise to die down. When he spoke again, his voice cut through the confusion like a blade. We know about the others. The species that disappeared. The civilizations that were erased. The children who were taken and never returned. He looked directly at High Chancellor Vorath. We know who approved it. We know who profited from it. And we have evidence. He produced another device from his pocket. A data crystal that glowed with soft blue light. This contains everything. Names, dates, locations. The entire network of species that have participated in child harvesting for thousands of years. He held it up so everyone could see. We are not asking for justice. We are not requesting an investigation. We are informing the galaxy of what has been done in the shadows. The crystal began to pulse, transmitting its contents to every communication network in the chamber. By the time this meeting ends, every government in the galaxy will have this information. Every species will know who the predators are. David dropped the crystal onto the platform at his feet. Humanity is no longer asking for acceptance into your council. We do not want to join a body that allowed this to happen. He turned to leave, then paused and looked back at the 412 species who had gathered to judge his people. You should have left our children alone. And with those words, he walked out of the chamber, leaving behind a galaxy that would never be the same. The data crystal's transmission spread across the galaxy like fire through dry grass. Within hours, every government, every news network, every species with access to communication technology knew what the Kelvani had done. And more importantly, they knew who had helped them do it. On Earth, Prime Minister Amara Obi stood before the United Parliament. The chamber was full, every seat taken by representatives from every nation on the planet. Behind her, Massive screens showed images that had been recovered from the Calvani facilities. Children in cages. Children in tanks. Children reduced to specimens in a collection that spanned 10,000 years. "We have recovered 124 human children," Amara said, her voice steady despite the anger burning in her chest. "Many of them are injured. Some will require care for the rest of their lives. But they are home. They are safe. And they will never be taken again." The chamber erupted in applause, but Amara raised her hand for silence. "However, our work is not finished. The data we recovered shows that the Calvani were not working alone. 17 other species participated in their harvesting network. Some provided funding. Some provided technology. Some simply looked away and pretended not to notice when ships full of children passed through their space." She turned to look at the screens behind her, where names and faces of alien officials scrolled past in an endless list. These species believed they were safe. They believed that the galaxy would protect them, that the Council would shield them from consequences. They were wrong. In the days that followed, humanity moved with a purpose that stunned the galactic community. The fleet that had surrounded the Calvani homeworld split into smaller groups, each one heading toward a different world. They did not attack. They did not threaten. They simply appeared in orbit and waited. Ambassador David Cole, who had become the face of human resistance, traveled between worlds delivering the same message: return the children. All of them, every species you have taken, we will wait. Some governments complied immediately. They had participated in the network out of fear or greed, but they had no desire to face human anger. They opened their facilities, released their prisoners, and begged for forgiveness. Others were not so wise. The Threxian Collective, a powerful alliance of reptilian species, refused to acknowledge any wrongdoing. Their leader, a massive creature named Korath, appeared on galactic broadcasts to denounce humanity as aggressors and liars. "These humans are barbarians," Korath declared. "They come from a violent world where they spent centuries killing each other. Now they seek to spread their chaos across the stars. The Council must stand together against this threat." But the Council was in chaos. The data from the crystal had revealed that over 40 Council species had direct connections to the harvesting network. High Chancellor Vorath himself had authorized shipments of children to Calvani research facilities. The very body that was supposed to maintain galactic peace had been complicit in unspeakable crimes. On Station Primarch, the massive space station that housed the Council headquarters, emergency sessions were called daily. Species that had been allies for millennia suddenly turned against each other. Old treaties were broken. New accusations flew. And through it all, humanity waited. General Thomas Burke, commander of Earth's military forces, monitored the situation from his flagship, the Unity. He was a patient man, but even his patience had limits. "They think we are bluffing," he said to his staff during a briefing. "They think that because we have not attacked, we will not attack. Should we demonstrate our capabilities? Let them believe what they want to believe. When the time comes, the truth will be all the more shocking." The truth was that humanity had been preparing for this moment for decades. When the first alien contact had occurred 40 years ago, Earth's governments had publicly celebrated while privately panicking. They recognized immediately that they were surrounded by species that had been traveling between stars for thousands of years. Species with technology that made human achievements look like children's toys. So they had prepared in secret. Underground facilities on every continent. Hidden shipyards on moons and asteroids. Research programs that operated in total darkness. Developing weapons and defenses that no alien scanner could detect. The galaxy had watched humanity build a modest fleet of exploration vessels and assumed that was the extent of their capabilities. They were very, very wrong. Back on Earth, A young analyst named Rosa Martinez was working late in the Global Intelligence Center. Her job was to process the data recovered from Kelvani facilities, organizing it into a database that could be searched and cross-referenced. It was difficult work, not because of its complexity, but because of its content. Every file she opened showed another atrocity. Another child taken, another family destroyed, another species that had silently suffered while the galaxy looked away. She was about to take a break when something caught her attention. A pattern in the shipping records. A series of destinations that did not match any known star system. Rosa dug deeper. The coordinates pointed to a region of space that had been declared off-limits by the Council thousands of years ago. According to official records, it was a dead zone, filled with radiation and gravitational anomalies that made travel impossible. But the shipping records showed regular deliveries to that region, hundreds of them, going back over 50,000 years. What were they sending there? Rosa whispered to herself. She began cross-referencing the shipments with the specimen records. What she found made her blood run cold. The Kelvani had not been the originators of the harvesting program. They were just the latest operators. The program had been established by a species called the Architects, being so old that most modern civilizations considered them myths. And the shipments to the dead zone? They were not deliveries. They were tributes. Rosa's hands trembled as she compiled her findings. The Architects were not extinct. They were still out there, hidden in the depths of space, collecting specimens from every corner of the galaxy. The Kelvani and their partners were just middlemen, gathering children and other biological materials to send to masters that most species did not even know existed. She sent an emergency message to Ambassador Cole, who was currently on Station Primarch, negotiating with what remained of the Council. His response came within minutes. "Are you certain?" Rosa looked at the data on her screen. 50,000 years of shipments. Millions of specimens. Species that had gone extinct shortly after being targeted for collection. "Certain," she typed back. The Kelvani were never in charge. Someone else is running the operation. Someone older. Someone who has been doing this since before most civilizations existed. There was a long pause before Cole's next message arrived. Find out who they are. Find out where they are. And find out if the children we are looking for are still alive. Rosa nodded to herself, alone in the dark office. "I will," she said. "I will find them all." She had no idea that the Architects had already found her, that her search query had triggered an alert in systems that had not been activated for 10,000 years, and that something ancient and terrible was now waking up, turning its attention toward the small blue planet that had dared to ask questions. The hunt for truth had begun, and humanity had just become the prey. The first attack came without warning. Rosa Martinez was walking to her apartment in New Geneva when the sky turned white. A beam of light, so bright it left after images for hours, struck the Global Intelligence Center. The building where she had worked for 7 years was gone in an instant, vaporized. 300 people who had been processing Kelvani data died before they could even understand what was happening. Across Earth, similar strikes hit military, installations, research facilities, and government buildings. The attacks lasted less than 90 seconds. When they ended, 47 locations had been destroyed. Over 12,000 people were dead, but Rosa was alive, and she still had the data. She ran to the nearest emergency shelter, clutching the portable drive she always carried. Years of training had taught her to never leave sensitive information unprotected. Now that training had saved everything, Prime Minister Amara Obi addressed the planet from an underground bunker 6 hours later. Her face was calm, but her eyes showed the weight of what had happened. "We have been attacked," she said simply. The weapons used were beyond anything in our current arsenal. They came from deep space, from coordinates that matched the dead zone we identified in the Kelvani records. The architects have announced their presence. She paused, letting the information sink in. They want us to stop. They want us to be afraid. They want us to forget what we have learned and accept our place as livestock for their collection. Her jaw tightened. They have made a terrible mistake. General Burke's fleet moved into defensive positions around Earth while scientists analyzed the weapon signatures. What they found was both terrifying and illuminating. The attacks had come from a single source, a massive structure hidden in the heart of the dead zone. The structure was using some kind of faster-than-light targeting system that allowed it to strike anywhere in the galaxy within seconds. If they can hit us that fast, why did they only attack 47 targets? Captain Vasquez asked during a strategy meeting. Because they wanted us to know they could hit us, Burke replied. This was a warning, not an extermination attempt. They are trying to scare us into submission. Will it work? Burke almost smiled. Have you met humanity? On Station Primarch, Ambassador Cole found himself suddenly very popular. Species that had ignored his messages now begged for meetings. Governments that had denounced humanity now offered alliances. The architects had been the galaxy's deepest secret for millennia, and now that secret was exposed. Everyone wanted to know what humanity planned to do about it. Cole met with representatives from over 50 species in a single day. Most of them had the same story. Their ancestors had made deals with the architects long ago, exchanging periodic tributes for protection from extinction. Over time, the deals had become normalized. Harvesting became routine. Children became currency. We did not know what we were doing was wrong, said a trembling elder from a species called the Fenari. It was simply how things were done. Cole looked at the creature with cold eyes. You took children from their families and sold them to monsters. You knew exactly what you were doing. You simply did not care until it affected you. But Cole also understood that anger alone would not save humanity. They needed allies, even imperfect ones. And they needed information that the crystalline chorus provided both. The chorus was one of the oldest species in the galaxy, beings made of living crystal that communicated through harmonic vibrations. They had been part of a coalition that had opposed the architects millions of years ago. Most of that coalition had been destroyed. The chorus had survived by pretending to comply while secretly preserving records. Of the architect's true nature, the representative met with Cole in a shielded chamber deep within Station Primarch. The translator equipment hummed as the chorus's harmonics were converted to words. The architects are not a species in the way you understand the term, the chorus explained. They are a network of consciousness, patterns of thought distributed across countless processing nodes throughout the galaxy. They cannot be killed in the traditional sense, because they have no single body to destroy. Then how do we fight them? Cole asked. There is a central hub where their consciousness is most concentrated. If that hub can be disrupted, the network will fragment. The individual nodes will lose coordination. They will become weak enough to be destroyed one by one. Where is this hub? The chorus hesitated, its crystal body pulsing with colors that the translator could not interpret. That is the problem. The architects chose their hub location specifically to make it impossible for organic species to attack. It is hidden inside a star. Cole felt something cold settle in his stomach. Which star? The one your species orbits? The one you call Soul. The silence that followed was absolute. You are saying, Cole said slowly, that the architect's central consciousness is inside our sun. Yes, they placed it there approximately 4,000 years ago, when they first identified humanity as a species of interest. They wanted to observe you closely, and they wanted to ensure that if you ever became a threat, destroying you would be simple. Cole understood the implications immediately. The architects had built their most critical infrastructure inside the one place humanity could never attack without destroying themselves. It was a perfect trap There must be another way, he said. There is one possibility. The hub draws power from the star's fusion reactions. If that power supply could be temporarily interrupted, the hub would become vulnerable. It could be physically destroyed during the interruption. How long would the interruption last? Based on our calculations, approximately 3 minutes. And how do we interrupt power from a star? The chorus's crystals chimed with what might have been sadness. Someone would have to enter the corona and deploy a disruption device directly. The heat would be ... unsurvivable. Cole sat in silence, processing what he had learned. Humanity's enemy was literally hiding inside their sun. The only way to defeat it was a suicide mission. And even if they succeeded, they would only have 3 minutes to destroy a structure that had existed for billions of years. But he also knew something the architects did not understand, something that no alien species had ever truly grasped about humanity. They were willing to sacrifice everything for their children. He sent a message to General Burke. I need the fastest ship we have, and I need volunteers who are willing to fly into the sun. Burke's response came back immediately. How many volunteers do you need? As many as we have. Everyone volunteered. Every single person in the fleet. You will need to choose. Cole closed his eyes. Of course they had, because that was what humans did. When their children were in danger, nothing else mattered. He opened his eyes and began composing the most difficult message of his life. A call for the mission that would determine whether humanity survived or died. Meanwhile, deep in the heart of Earth's sun, something ancient stirred. The architects had been listening to every communication. They knew about the chorus's information. They knew about the planned attack, and they were not afraid. Let them come. The collective consciousness whispered through 1 billion nodes. Let them burn. Their courage will mean nothing against the fire of their own star. They could not conceive of a species that would choose death over submission. That failure of imagination would cost them everything. The ship was called the Phoenix. It had been built in secret over the past 20 years, designed for missions that no one wanted to imagine. Its hull was reinforced with materials that could withstand temperatures that would melt ordinary spacecraft. Its shields were experimental, created by scientists who had never expected their work to be tested. And its crew had been selected from thousands of volunteers. Each one knowing that they would not return. Commander Isaac Rowe stood on the observation deck, looking out at Earth. The planet hung in the darkness like a blue jewel, peaceful and beautiful, unaware of the horror hidden inside its own sun. He was 61 years old. He had served in the military for 40 years. He had a daughter and 2 grandchildren who lived in a small town in what used to be called Australia. He had said goodbye to them yesterday, pretending it was a routine deployment. He could not tell them the truth. Commander. The voice belonged to Lieutenant Maya Okonjo, the youngest member of the crew at 28. She had volunteered because her brother had been on the Aurora. He had not survived. Lieutenant, is the crew ready? Yes, sir. 11 people, prepared to fly into the sun. She paused. Permission to speak freely? Granted. I just wanted to say that it is an honor, sir. Whatever happens, it is an honor to die with people like you. Rowe turned to look at her. She was young enough to be his granddaughter. She should have had decades ahead of her, filled with love and achievement and life. Instead, she was here, ready to burn so that others could survive. The honor is mine, Lieutenant, he said quietly. Now let us go save our people. The Phoenix launched at midnight, Earth time. It accelerated toward the sun at speeds that would have torn apart any conventional ship. Behind it, the human fleet arranged itself in defensive positions, ready to hold off any architect counterattack while the mission was in progress. General Burke watched from the bridge of the Unity. He had wanted to be on the Phoenix himself. But his officers had convinced him that his place was here. Someone had to coordinate the battle that would follow. How long until they reached the corona? He asked. 17 hours, sir, Captain Vasquez replied. The crystalline chorus is preparing the disruption device. It will be transmitted to the Phoenix when they are in position. And the enemy? Vasquez hesitated. No movement from the hub. Either they do not believe we will succeed, or they are waiting for something. Burke nodded grimly. They are waiting for us to fail. They have seen civilizations challenge them before. They have always won. They cannot imagine that this time will be different. He turned to face his crew. Let us prove them wrong. On Station Primarch, Ambassador Cole was dealing with a different kind of battle. The galactic community was in chaos. Species that had supported the architects for millennia were now scrambling to distance themselves. Species that had been victims were demanding justice. And everyone wanted to know what humanity planned to do. Cole met with the council, or what remained of it. High Chancellor Vorath had been arrested by his own people after the full extent of his collaboration with the architects became public. The new acting chancellor was a being named Tessara, a member of a species that had lost millions of their young to the harvesting program. We want to help, Tessara said. Many species do. We understand now that we were all victims of the same system. We should stand together. Cole shook his head. No, this fight is ours. But why? You cannot face the architects alone. Because humanity made a promise. Cole's voice was hard. We promised that we would find every child who was taken and bring them home. We promised that we would punish those responsible. And we promised that we would make sure this never happens again. Those promises cannot be delegated. He stood up from the negotiating table. When this is over, there will be time for alliances. There will be time for rebuilding and reconciliation. But right now, there is only the mission. And that mission belongs to humanity. The Phoenix entered the outer corona at hour 16. The temperature outside the hull was over 1 million degrees. The shields held, but barely. Alarms screamed as systems began to fail. Commander Rowe sat in the pilot's chair, his hands steady on the controls. Around him, his crew worked their stations with calm efficiency. They had trained for this moment. They were ready. Beginning final approach, he announced. Transmitting coordinates to the fleet. On the Unity, General Burke received the transmission. The Phoenix's sensors had located the Architect's hub, a crystalline structure nestled in the heart of a massive solar flare. It was beautiful in a terrible way, like a spider's web made of pure energy. They see it, Vasquez confirmed. The disruption device is charging. How long until they can deploy it? 4 minutes. Those 4 minutes felt like hours. Every second, Burke expected the architects to strike. Every moment, he waited for the Phoenix to disappear in a burst of solar fire. But the ship kept going, pushing deeper into the corona, getting closer to its target. 2 minutes. On the Phoenix, Lieutenant Okonjo monitored the structural integrity readings. The hull was beginning to warp. The shields were failing. They had maybe 90 seconds before the ship came apart. Commander, we are losing containment. Rowe nodded. I know. Hold together a little longer, old girl. He was talking to the ship, but also to himself. To his crew. To everyone who had ever dreamed of a day when humanity would stand up against the darkness and refuse to be afraid. 1 minute. The architects finally responded. A beam of energy lanced out from the hub, striking the Phoenix's starboard side. The ship shuddered. 3 crew members died instantly as their compartment was exposed to the corona. Shields down. Hull breaching. 45 seconds to deployment. Rowe gritted his teeth. All remaining power to the disruption device. Everything we have. The lights on the bridge went out. The artificial gravity failed. The survivors floated in darkness, illuminated only by the hellish glow of the sun outside. 30 seconds. Another beam hit them. More compartments breached. More crew lost. Only 4 people remained alive: Ro, Okonjo, and 2 engineers who were bleeding from wounds they could not feel. 20 seconds. The disruption device hummed with power. It was a small thing, no bigger than a human fist, but it contained technology that the crystalline chorus had developed over millions of years. Technology designed specifically for this moment. 10 seconds. Ro looked at Okonjo. She was crying, but she was also smiling. They both knew they would not survive the next few moments. But they also knew that their sacrifice would matter. For the children, Ro said. For all of them, Okonjo replied. Deployment. The disruption device activated. A pulse of energy erupted from the Phoenix, spreading outward through the corona. It hit the magnetic field lines that connected the hub to the sun's fusion core. And for the first time in 4 billion years, the architects lost their power source. The hub went dark. On the Unity, Burke watched as the Phoenix's signal disappeared. The ship was gone. Commander Ro and his crew were dead, but they had succeeded. All ships, Burke said, his voice cracking with emotion. The hub is vulnerable. We have 3 minutes. Begin the assault. The human fleet surged forward, every ship converging on the exposed structure. For 3 minutes, they poured everything they had into the ancient enemy. And somewhere in the heart of the sun, something that had existed since the birth of the galaxy began to scream. The destruction of the hub sent shockwaves across the galaxy dot in the moments after the assault. The distributed nodes of the architect's consciousness began to collapse. Without the central hub to coordinate them, they became isolated fragments, confused and vulnerable. One by one, they went silent. One by one, they died. On planets and stations throughout known space, systems that had been controlled by the architects for millions of years suddenly failed. Locks that had been sealed for millennia opened. Prisoners who had been held in stasis for generations woke up. And children began to come home. The first recovery ships reached the dead zone 3 days after the battle. What they found there made hardened soldiers weep. Massive facilities, hidden for eons, filled with specimens from 1,000 species. Some were alive, preserved in stasis pods that had maintained them for centuries. Others were not. The dead were beyond counting. Rosa Martinez, the analyst who had first discovered the architect's existence, was on one of those recovery ships. She had insisted on coming, even though she had no military training and no business being in a combat zone. She needed to see. She needed to understand. The facility she entered was the largest one they had found. Its corridors stretched for miles, lined with pods containing creatures of every shape and size. Some she recognized from her research. Others were species that had gone extinct before humanity had even existed. In the deepest section, she found the human children. There were thousands of them. Boys and girls, men and women, spanning generations of collection. Some had been taken recently. Others had been in stasis for centuries, preserved exactly as they had been on the day of their abduction. Rosa walked among the pods, reading the labels that the architects had attached, names, ages, dates of collection. Each one a tragedy. Each one a family destroyed. She stopped in front of a pod containing a young girl. The label said she had been taken from a ship called the Morning Star, which had disappeared from Earth's records over 200 years ago. "We found you," Rosa whispered. "We finally found you." The recovery process took months. Every pod had to be carefully opened. Every survivor had to be examined, treated, and slowly reintroduced to the world. For those who had been in stasis for decades or centuries, the shock was overwhelming. They woke up in a universe they did not recognize, surrounded by descendants they had never known. Some could not cope. The trauma of their experience, combined with the disorientation of waking in a strange time, was too much. They required constant care, gentle support, patience beyond measure, but many others adapted. They learned about the years they had missed. They met family members who had never stopped searching for them. They discovered that their suffering had not been forgotten, that humanity had fought a war across the stars to bring them home. 1 year after the battle, Earth held a ceremony to honor those who had died in the fight against the architects. The service was held at a new memorial, built on the spot where the Global Intelligence Center had been destroyed. The names of every victim, from the children taken by the Kelvani to the crew of the Phoenix, were inscribed on walls of white stone. Prime Minister Amara Obi spoke first. 1 year ago, we discovered that we were not alone in the universe. We also discovered that we were not safe. Powers older than our civilization had been watching us, collecting us, using us as specimens in experiments we could not imagine. She paused, looking out at the crowd. They believed that we were weak. They believed that we would submit. They believed that our history of internal conflict made us incapable of standing together against a common enemy. She gestured to the names on the wall behind her. They were wrong, and these are the people who proved it. Commander Isaac Rowe's name was first among the crew of the Phoenix. Next to it was a photograph of him in his uniform, smiling slightly, as if he knew a secret that the viewer did not. Lieutenant Maya Okonjo's name was next to his. Her photograph showed her as she had been in life, young, determined, ready to face whatever came. General Thomas Burke, who had survived the battle but retired immediately after, stepped forward to speak. "I have been a soldier for 50 years, he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I have seen combat. I have lost friends. I have given orders that sent people to their deaths. But I have never been prouder than I was on the day the Phoenix flew into the sun." He looked at the photographs of the crew. They knew they would not come back. They knew they would burn. And they went anyway, because that is what humans do when our children are in danger. We do not calculate odds. We do not weigh costs and benefits. We simply act. We simply fight. We simply refuse to accept that evil will win. Ambassador David Cole spoke last. He had become a hero to the galaxy, the face of human resistance. But he did not feel like a hero. He felt like a man who had done what was necessary and paid a terrible price. "The children are home," he said. "Not all of them. Many were lost before we could find them. Many more were damaged in ways that cannot be healed. But those who survived are among us today. They are rebuilding their lives. They are learning to be free." He looked at the crowd, which included survivors from dozens of species. The crystalline chorus was there, their harmonics forming a mournful melody that needed no translation. Tessara, the new chancellor of the reformed Galactic Council, stood with representatives from 50 other species that had been freed from the architect's control. "We did not fight alone," Cole continued. "When the galaxy learned the truth, many species chose to stand with us. They sent ships. They shared technology. They risked their own destruction to help us defeat a common enemy. That alliance will not be forgotten." He turned to face the memorial wall. "But we also fight for each other. That is what humans do. We argue. We compete. We sometimes hate each other for reasons that make no sense. But when someone threatens our children, all of that disappears. We become one people with one purpose, and nothing in the universe can stand against us." The ceremony ended with a moment of silence for the dead. Then, slowly, the crowd began to disperse. Families reunited. Friends embraced. The business of living continued, as it always does. Rosa Martinez stayed behind. She had been promoted to director of the recovery project, responsible for coordinating the return of survivors to their homeworlds. It was difficult work, emotionally exhausting, but she would not have traded it for anything. She was still standing in front of the memorial when an old man approached her. He was thin and frail, with white hair and eyes that had seen centuries pass. "You are Rosa Martinez," he said. It was not a question. "I am. And you are?" "My name is Marcus. I was taken from Earth 427 years ago." He smiled, and there was something ancient in that smile. "I wanted to thank you. Your research led to my rescue. I had given up hope of ever seeing the sun again." Rosa felt tears forming in her eyes. "You are welcome," she managed to say. Marcus looked at the memorial wall, at the thousands of names inscribed there. "They did this for us," he said quietly. "People who never knew us. People who had no reason to care. They fought and died so that we could come home." Rosa nodded. "That is what humans do." "Yes," Marcus agreed. "It is. I had forgotten that during my long sleep. I had forgotten what it meant to be human." He looked at her, and his old eyes were bright with something that might have been joy. "Thank you for reminding me." He walked away, leaving Rosa alone with the names of the dead. Above her, the sun shone down on Earth, as it had for billions of years. Somewhere inside that ancient fire, the ruins of the architect's hub still floated, slowly melting into nothing. The enemy that had terrorized the galaxy for eons was gone, and humanity, the species that had been marked for collection, had been the ones to destroy it. Rosa looked up at the sun and smiled. "We did it," she whispered. "We brought them home." The memorial stood silent around her, filled with names that would never be forgotten. And somewhere, in the vast reaches of space, other species looked toward Earth with a new kind of respect. Humanity was no longer a curiosity to be studied. They were no longer specimens to be collected. They were the species that had looked into the heart of a star and refused to be afraid. They were the species that had brought their children home, and they were just getting started.